Good evening to everybody. I hope you can all hear me. I'm Vangelio Kyriadzi, the director of the Fitch Laboratory of the British School at Athens, and I would like to welcome you on behalf of the BSA to this online lecture organized by the Friends of the BSA. For those unfamiliar with us, I would like to say that the BSA is a UK charity whose object is to conduct, facilitate and promote research in Greece in all periods and across all arts, humanities and social sciences disciplines. We do this from a main base in Athens, a smaller satellite research center at Knossos on Crete, and an office in London. You are looking now at a screenshot of our website, which we urge you to visit to explore what we do and also to consider signing up to our mailing list if you want to receive information about our activities, including future events like this one, but also perhaps to become one of our supporters. Before I hand over to Marie-Christine Keith, I would like to give a few information, a few protocols that will help, I hope, the event run smoothly. Other than the speaker and the host, all microphones are off by default. And throughout the talk, two features are available that you can see on your screen at the bottom. A chat feature that looks like a single speech bubble that allows you to type text which can be read by other participants as well as the lecturer and host. You can use this if you experience any issue, and my co-host Flora Michelaki will try to assist. Otherwise, we will ignore comments in chat, but feel free, of course, to comment to each other during the talk. Moreover, a Q&A feature that looks like two speech bubbles, one on top of the other, into which you can type questions for the speaker. Only you, the speaker, and the host can see this. After the lecture finishes, Marie-Christine will read out of the questions received and the speaker will respond. You should see also a small window in the top right of your screen. If this gets in your way, you can mouse over it and either move it around your screen or you can click on the bars above it to make it smaller. I hope that this is all clear. The Q&A protocol will be repeated at the end of the lecture by Marie-Christine. I would like now to welcome myself, our speaker, Maria Mina, a good friend and collaborator since our time in London many years ago. I'm really looking forward to hearing all about her recent research in the Dodecanese. And I would like to hand over to Marie-Christine, who will say a few things about the Friends of the BSA and introduce our speaker tonight. Marie-Christine.
Thank you very much indeed. Just a quick word about the Friends of the BSA. They support the British School at Athens, obviously, by organising regular lectures like this one and also some trips to Greece. You can help us by making a donation via our website through the donation portal. The link is provided in the chat box. If you quote Friends lecture in the additional comments field, the gifts will go to the Friends, and collectively, all these gifts make a huge difference. I would now like to introduce our speaker tonight. We are very lucky to have her. Dr. Maria Mina is currently an assistant professor of prehistoric archaeology at the University of the Aegean. This is a multi-campus university located in Lesbos, Chios, Samos, Rhodes, Syros, Lemnos, and with its headquarters in Mytilene in Lesbos. Dr. Mina is a graduate of Southampton University and completed her PhD on Aegean prehistoric archaeology and anthropomorphic figurines at the Institute of Archaeology in London. She has taught at the Hellenic Open University and the University of Cyprus. Besides her work on numerous field projects in Cyprus and Greece, she has published widely on her research interests, of the Neolithic and Bronze Age periods in the Aegean and in Cyprus, anthropomorphic figurines, gender archaeology, social complexity, and island archaeology. Dr. Mina is a reviewer for several international journals, a member of the executive board of the European Association of Archaeologists, a member of the Association for Choroplastic Studies, and that for Archaeology and Gender in Europe. May I invite you now, Dr. Mina, to give your lecture entitled Sacred Caves Outside Crete, Daskalio Cave on Kalymnos and its connections to Minoan ritual practices. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to welcome everyone. Dear colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for honoring me with your virtual presence tonight. Before I start my presentation, I would like to thank Mrs. Marie-Christine Keith and the British School of Athens Friends Committee for inviting me to present my research in the lecture series. And I would also like to thank Ms. Flora Michelaki for doing all the preparations to make this possible. I also take this opportunity to thank Professor Rebecca Sweetman, Director of the British School, and the members of the Selection Committee for granting me the British School at Athens Centenary Bursary Award for the period 2024 to 2025. The award allowed me to carry out research last summer on the Neolithic figurines from Knossos in the British, the Ashmolean and the Fitzwilliam Museums as part of the Neolithic Knossos Publication Project, which is carried out under the aegis of the British School at Athens. Let us now turn to the theme of today's lecture, which focuses on Daskalio Cave, or also known as Vathi Cave, on the island of Kalymnos, as a case study for examining the periodic occupation of caves as sacred loci outside Crete that demonstrate cultural connections to Minoan ritual practices. The theme of today's lecture draws from an article co-authored with a dear colleague, Myrto Veikou of the University of Patras, which highlights the importance of Daskalio Cave as a diachronic site of pilgrimage and maritime mobility. In the time that follows, the presentation will be organized in three main parts. In the first part, I will highlight what distinguishes caves as geomorphological formations from other natural settings and how their special qualities rendered them ideal backgrounds for ritual activities in the prehistoric period. In the next section, I will present the available evidence from Daskalio Cave on Kalymnos, and I will discuss it critically in relation to sacred caves known from Minoan Crete. In the final section, it will be proposed that the coastal location of Daskalio Cave, its access by sea, and the presence of imports may suggest a close connection of ritual practices with maritime travel and seafarers, for whom the cave may have marked a sacred landmark or a site of pilgrimage. It is also proposed that coastal caves occupying liminal spaces, environmentally and symbolically, served as landmarks where mobility and cultural exchanges created distinct maritime identities. Let us now begin this lecture with a brief introduction on caves as geomorphological and symbolic spaces with tonic qualities. Caves are defined geographically as natural openings in the ground extending beyond the zone of light, and are large enough to permit human exploration. They occur in a wide variety of rock types and are caused by widely different geological processes. Caves also range in size from single small rooms to interconnecting passages extending many miles. Caves constitute common features in the geomorphologically varied terrain of the Eastern Mediterranean, extending from the deserts of Egypt and Syro-Palestine to the Aegean Islands and the forested mountains of Anatolia, Greece, and the Balkans. Caves, which often occupied prominent locations as visible landmarks or as nodal points in exchange networks and mobility routes, have yielded archaeological evidence which indicates the diachronic performance of ritual practices within their enclosed spaces, as argued also by Mirtoveikou. Although the use of caves as occupation sites and seasonal shelters is well attested archaeologically, for the purposes of this presentation, I focus exclusively on the ritual aspect of cavern spaces. Caves present marked differences in relation to open-air settlements, and it is in that respect they need to be approached as distinct spaces that on the one hand provide a theatre in which practices take place in enclosed conditions, while on the other, their bounded setting may have fostered shared sensorial experiences across time and space. The location of caves can be considered liminal as they're often situated in the natural, as opposed to the constructed, environment. With reference to prehistoric caves in Greece, Peter Tompkins has postulated that caves' liminality may also be understood in relation to their temporal and spatial distance from everyday life. Moreover, caves can be understood as arenas in which the domestic was transformed and people and places were enchained across time and space through the deposition and manipulation of material and corporal culture in the context of ritualization practices. Furthermore, other works suggest that caves may have been perceived as cosmological settings which occupied a transitional space between the open sky and the depths of the earth. Entering a cave, therefore, may have marked a passage, a portal leading from daylight to the underworld, a supernatural locale that in many cultures has been considered the birthplace of everything. Another symbolic dimension of the underground setting of caves has been paralleled by Laopi to the womb, a metaphor that may have held true in many cultures. The location of caves within the bowels of the earth may have identified them as the womb which regenerates and brings to life those who enter its enclosed space. These symbolic associations may have rendered caves sacred spaces of interiority which led participants through a journey inward and downward, thus creating a sense of absorption and introspection. The enclosed conditions and internal morphology of caves are also responsible for generating sensorial triggers that contributed to the distinct experiences of those who entered their bounded spaces. One way the senses were stimulated inside cavernous spaces is through the production of awe-inspiring acoustic phenomena, as demonstrated in a study by Diaz-Andreu and Mattioli. Acoustic phenomena, including the production of echoes, that is, waves of sound bounced off a hard surface, resonance, the amplification of sound, and reverberation, the increase of sound levels, distortion, and intelligibility of speech as repeated sound waves reflect off surrounding surfaces, were responsible for generating overpowering experiences. Vision is another sense that was affected by the restrictedness of underground spaces, as natural light was limited, and depending on the time of the day and the season of the year, it may have illuminated different parts of the cave in the form of a striking radiant light. The penetrating light could also generate shadows, thus contributing further to the illusory perceptions of cavernous spaces as suggested by Tyree. Smell and taste of prepared and consumed food, which often formed a vital part of ritual practices, further contributed to the sensorial experience of caves as demonstrated by Keats. Additionally, the restricted spaces and the morphology of caves enclosing walls imposed a particular way of bodily movement. Closely connected to the corporeal experience of cavernous environments is the sense known as kinesthesis, which can be defined as bodily awareness of space through the movement and position of body parts. The haptic experience of cavernous spaces could be gained through the feel and texture of hard, moist, or smooth surfaces of caves and the objects employed between their walls. Furthermore, the sixth sense, which refers to the intuition or perception through means which do not rely on the employment of the five senses, also contributed to the experience of caves. With reference to the sixth sense, we can include the epiphany of a spirit or religious figure as part of a ritual taking place in underground settings, which may have shaped people's perception of space and landscape. Caves are also conducive to the creation of an altered state of consciousness in connection to their enclosed spaces and the activities that take place within their boundaries, as demonstrated by a study by Kedar and colleagues. For example, the burning of torches inside deep and dark caves has been shown to decrease the level of oxygen to the level that can induce a state of hypoxia, responsible for hallucinations and out-of-body experiences through the increase of dopamine hormone levels. Increased dopamine concentrations in the brain can result in dreams and hallucinations, both of which are characterized by out-of-body experiences and sensations, such as flying and floating. According to Ustinova, the attainment of an altered state of consciousness may also explain why caves, as enclosed and solitary spaces, were chosen in antiquity for oracular activities. One of the ways divination could be achieved related to the sensory deprivation through the reduction of external stimuli, which modern research has proven can lead to hallucinatory states, visions, and revelations. Mystics and ascetics who practiced social isolation in their quest for enlightenment could attain altered state of consciousness inside caves through limitation of external stimuli, which in turn resulted in disturbed perceptions of body image, as well as auditory and visual hallucinations. The special qualities and experiences associated with cavernous spaces are relevant for our understanding of the use of caves in the past in connection to ritual practices, as will be discussed later. Let us now turn to the cave of Daskalio, the case study we are discussing today. The cave is located on Kalymnos, as you can see on the map, which forms part of the island group of the Dodecanese in the southeast Aegean. The cave is situated in the Vathi Valley, the most fertile part of the island, which extends as a long strip of land, leading to the narrow cove of Rina on the east coast of the island, facing the region of Caria on the west Anatolian coast. Rina Bay classifies as a fjord, thus providing safe anchorage, as you can see on the photograph on the right. The limestone cave is nestled on the northern cliff of the cove, approximately 100 meters from the shore and 12 meters above sea level. Access can be gained from the sea through a steep path. I should add here that the steps you can see on the photograph on the left were actually added or carved by the Italians in the during the Italian period of occupation on the Dodecanese. So this is a recent feature. The internal space of the cave consists of a main chamber, approximately 25 meters in depth, 12 meters in width, 10 meters in height, and the second chamber access through the east side of the floor, where impressive stalagmites stand. From that point, steep surfaces lead to a pond formed by the cave's collected water. Regarding the excavation of the Daskalio Cave, I should mention that it was originally investigated by an Italian team of archaeologists in 1922 during the period of the Italian occupation of the Dodecanese. Our knowledge relies on the 1928 preliminary report by Amedeo Maiuri, which nevertheless provides limited information about the stratigraphy of the site. The site has become known to us primarily through the subsequent publications by Mario Benzi, which present the finds in connection to stratigraphy as recorded in the Italian inventory kept in the Rhodes Museum. Excavations have revealed a diachronic use of the cave from prehistory to the Byzantine times, although our knowledge remains partial due to the disturbed deposits by later occupation and recent looting activities. Available evidence dates the earliest occupation of the cave to the later Neolithic period, but its use continued intermittently in the Bronze Age, predominantly in the Late Minoan 1 and Late Helladic 3 phases. Before we turn our attention to the Minoan phase, it will be of interest, I believe, to review briefly the diachronic and varied use of the Daskalio Cave during prehistoric times. Evidence indicates that the cave was occupied already in the Neolithic period, which, according to Benzi, would place it chronologically in the same phase as other known sites from the Dodecanese and the late Neolithic phases represented at Tirani on Samos. Samson has suggested that cave occupation characterizes the end of the Neolithic, as attested by Agia Varvara and Agio Galaos on Kalymnos, Kalifyes and Koumelo caves on Rhodes, caves on Euboea and in Attica, with a marked decrease in the Bronze Age. Although it has been proposed that Neolithic caves were used seasonally by transhuman pastoralists for storage, as indicated by the presence of large vessels, the chthonic use of caves cannot be dismissed, as attested by primary or secondary burials in the cave of Agios Georgios at Kalifyes and Koumelo cave on Rhodes, according to Samson. For the early Bronze Age period, it has been argued by Benzi that the cave served as a dwelling, as indicated by evidence for hearths, tools, and food remains, similar to the cave of Aspri Petra on Kos, as suggested by Samson. Occupation is indicated by remains of hearths at different levels, which were associated with bone and stone tools and ceramic sherds. Benzi has suggested that the pottery fragments recovered from the Daskalio Cave demonstrate cultural affinities with Western Anatolia, namely Troy, Aphrodisias, and Beyke Sultan, and with the insular Aegean, in particular the sites of Ireon on Samos, Seraglio on Kos, and Asomatos on Rhodes. Material of early Bronze Age 3 date point to Cycladic connections with Phylakopi, Akrotiri, and Parikia. Other clay finds are a group of incised spindle whorls, similar to examples from Ireon 4 and Troy 4, according to Benson. Non-ceramic finds include 3 bronze or copper pins and a dagger. The 3 pins have parallels at Troy in early Bronze Age 2 and 3, and Ireon on Samos and Cyprus. The toggle pin and the disc-shaped pin are both types which are rare in the Aegean, according to Benzi. Occupation of the Daskalio Cave during the Middle Bronze Age is suggested by limited evidence, which does not allow us to determine its nature. The finds include imitations of Minoan types, a carinated cup, and a large red-burnished clay lamp. A fragment of a Cycladic white-closed vessel, possibly a big jug of the curvilinear style, is considered to be an import, according to Benzi. The Daskalio Cave continues to demonstrate connections with Western Anatolia and other island sites, such as Miletus, Anatolian Samos, Saragian Kos, Triandan and Mount Philarimos on roads, as well as the Cyclades indicated by the presence of a carinated cup, an imported lamp at the middle Cycladic phase. The shared material culture across the islands highlights the close connections through maritime routes before the exertion of the apparent Minoan influence in the Southeast Aegean. In the late Bronze Age, the available evidence, as suggested by Benzi, points to a ritual use of Daskalio Cave during the Late Minoan I phase. As will be discussed in greater detail later, evidence suggests that the use of the Daskalio Cave continued also in late Helladic III without a break, and the presence of Mycenaean finds on other locations on the island and late Helladic IIIb to C pottery in Aegean Varvara Cave suggests that the island formed part of the sphere of Mycenaean expansion, according to Benzi. Alongside local pottery types of late Helladic date, Mycenaean pottery appears in significant quantity in late Helladic III, including a decorated neck shirt with a foliate band of late Helladic IIb type and a body shirt of a large alabastron. Among the Mycenaean pottery are included sherds of imported vessels of late Helladic IIIa2 to IIIb date, such as a decorated fragment of a piriform jar with parallels known from the Petsars house deposit at Mycenae, and chamber tombs on Rhodes, as well as open shapes, cups and kilikes known from deposits on Mycenae, Rhodes and Kos are suggested by Benzi and Marketo. For Benzi, the limited number of figurines and other religious type finds suggest that the cave was occupied as a seasonal shelter by itinerant people, such as fishermen, sailors, or merchants, although in my opinion, we cannot rule out the possibility that the cave continued to be a cult place, considering the lack of plain domestic pottery. For the purposes of the analysis, discussion focuses on the late Minoan I occupation phase of the Daskalio Cave, spanning the 1600 to 1425 BC period approximately, and it is proposed that it demonstrates unequivocal evidence for ritual activities with clear references to Minoan cultural practices. Let us now examine how the Daskalio Cave compares to sacred caves from Crete and demonstrates affinities with Minoan ritual practices in terms of material culture, the location and morphology of the cave, as well as the performed activities. The imported Minoan pottery reveals clear cultural affinities with East Crete. The assemblage included two conical raita, one fragment of a cup raiton of extremely high quality, closed vessels including a fragmentary decorated teacup, a fragment of the marine style variety, which we know from other excavations that it is associated with religious contexts, as well as a Minoan vase in the form of a stone shallow ladle. Raita and the stone ladle discovered in the cave have clear ritual associations. As we already know from excavations on Minoan Crete, raita were used as libation vessels in religious contexts, and they were associated with high social status. Although raita are not found in significant numbers in Minoan caves, a single example is known from Skotino Cave on Crete. The late Minoan occupation phase has also produced vessels of local light on dark, dark on light ware pottery, whose decorative motifs and techniques find parallels in the Southeast Aegean. The light on dark, dark on light assemblages comprised closed vessels of large and medium size, such as storage jars and pouring vessels, including a large tube vessel. A number of these vessels were most likely imported from Kos, and the pierced fragment base serving as a raiton resembles a Minoan bird's nest bowl known from Skotino and other caves on Crete. A fragment of a second tube-shaped vessel has parallels with similar shaped Minoan vessels associated with religious activities attested in sacred caves. The cave has also yielded shards of local plain pottery belonging to at least 3 bridge-spouted jars with known parallels from Triandon Rhodes, Tiganion Samos, Miletus Stratum 4, Iasos, and Techiusa on the Anatolian coast. Among this variety are included round-mouthed miniature jugs that resemble known counterparts of late Minoan date. Numerous conical cups, as well as 2 fragmentary fireboxes, trace their origin to Crete and are also attested in Minoan sacred caves, as in the case of Skotino Cave, but also in the southeast Aegean. Other ceramic objects include courseware tripod cooking pots used for food preparation, finds that are often recovered from Minoan sacred caves, as in Skotino Cave. The recovery of 16 complete and fragmentary Minoan type loom weights from the cave is also consistent with religious activities, and are often recovered from peak sanctuaries and sacred caves on Crete, as attested at Archaeological Cave. Finally, a Minoan bronze figurine of the male worshipper variety is also associated with Minoan religious activities, and numerous examples have been recovered from sacred caves on Crete. Further to the archaeological finds, the location of Daskalio Cave demonstrates additional similarities with Minoan sacred caves. Often, the high visibility of Minoan sacred caves, as demonstrated by Kamares Cave in the Messara Valley in Crete, may act as a goal and invitation for the pilgrim. Moreover, Minoan sacred caves were positioned on key terrestrial locations, as in the case of Latsida Vrikou Cave on Crete, which you can see in the map in East Crete. Daskalio Cave is visible from the sea and from the opposite cliff of Rina Cove, yet awareness of its almost concealed position inside the fjord would require the participants' knowledge of the local coastline. The fact that the cave can be accessed exclusively from the sea also ensures protection from the intruders or the non-initiated. The nodal location of Daskalio Cave along the East Aegean maritime route allowed the monitoring of seafaring traffic, which connected East Crete to the islands and the Anatolian coast as far north as Troy, as suggested by early Bronze Age finds. A comparable example from Crete is in Athos Cave in the south, which is located on the south-central coast of the island, with clear visibility towards the Libyan Sea and the maritime routes towards the islands of the southeast Aegean and as far as the Levant. Other similarities between the Daskalio Cave and Minoan sacred caves concern their internal morphology. In Minoan sacred caves, the focus is often at the entrance to the darkest and lowest part of the cave, leading to a pool of water, constituting the sacred part with the greatest concentration of finds, as attested in Kamares Cave on Crete. Alternatively, the area may be defined by speleothems with or without the presence of a pool of water, as in Skotino Cave, also on Crete. Another feature of Minoan sacred caves is their downward sloping inclination, as in Psychro Cave, which retains cold air and ensures dry conditions in winter. Many caves with downward sloping entrances also consist of multiple chambers at lower levels, as in Aegean Cave, with the lowest and steepest area receiving minimum or zero natural light depending on season, as in Skotino Cave. Daskalio Cave is consistent with the morphology of Minoan sacred caves, as it is accessed through a downward sloping surface, thus ensuring dark and cool atmospheric conditions. Moreover, the cave possesses speleothems and 2 chambers, the darkest of which featured a pool of water. Regrettably, it is not possible to determine whether one area constituted the focus of the cult activities, as late Bronze Age pottery was recovered from a mixed deposit disturbed by later occupation. Nonetheless, the natural features of the cave would not have gone unnoticed by participants familiar with Minoan cult practices. To reconstruct the nature of the cult activities taking place inside Daskalio Cave, we now need to turn our attention to the available evidence from synchronous caves on Crete. Ritual practices performed inside Minoan sacred caves involved the use of liquids, as attested by vessels associated with pouring and drinking, such as jugs, spouted jars, pedestal chalices, cups and raita for libation rituals, as in Skotino Cave on Crete. Other activities related to heating food or other substances in tripod cooking pots, which bear traces of contact with fire, as in Melitonic Cave, also on Crete. Cooking pots recovered from caves are smaller in size than those from domestic contexts, and only occasionally are they associated with cooking trays and dishes. Transport and storage vessels, such as jars and pithoi, are also known from a number of caves, for example, Skotino Cave, and they may have facilitated the collection of cave water as well as the transferal and safekeeping of supplies. The transportation of such heavy and bulky vessels to the caves along steep paths is indicative of the vital role such containers held in ritual activities. Further to the ritual activities taking place in Daskalio Cave, which demonstrate an association with Minoan activities, it is argued that an additional dimension of the participants' identity relates to the maritime seafaring that may partly to the maritime traveling that may partly justify the offshore connections to Crete. Concerning the maritime connections of Daskalio Cave, I would suggest that the prerequisite for the performance of late Minoan cult activities may have relied on travel and the familiarity with seafaring routes. It is no coincidence that island communities of the Southeast Aegean, previously acquainted with trades of neighboring Anatolia, adapted Minoan religious practices at a time when they engaged actively in Minoan maritime networks. The presence of important Minoan pottery is clear evidence that Kalymnos formed a key location along the so-called east string of islands, which connected East Crete to the Anatolian coast. The involvement of islands of the Southeast Aegean is further demonstrated by the fact that the local light on dark, dark on light pottery, of course, can be found along maritime routes from the island of Aegean to the coastal centers of Anatolia and Cyprus. Thus, islands featuring Minoanized elements of the Southeast Aegean appear to have acted as nodal points connecting Crete to Anatolia. The coastal location of Daskalio Cave, therefore, is accessed by sea, and the presence of imports may suggest a close connection with travel or itinerant sailors or merchants for whom the cave may have marked a point of reference or a site of pilgrimage. Those with access to the cave are likely to have belonged to local communities, as indicated by the use of local pottery, who nevertheless emulated Minoan material culture and practices, as exemplified by the exotic taste developed by elite groups at Seraglio and Kos for fine-painted semi-globular cups with Cretan features. Daskalio Cave can thus be considered as a locale where the performance of cult practices presupposed the crossing of water. In terms of their spatial orientation, caves constituted unique locales which held a liminal position in relation to open-air settlements, while constituting visible landmarks in the landscape. In the case of Daskalio, its coastal location placed the cave between the land and the sea, on the fringes of the settled valley with restricted access by sea. At the same time, the cave's location on the face of the rock marked the entrance to Rina Bay, but also provided clear visibility towards maritime traffic. Cult activities taking place inside Minoan sacred caves can be understood with reference to the liminal position they held between the visible and subterranean world, which served as a natural barrier for the exclusion of community members from participating in the religious practices unfolding inside the enclosed space. For Daskalio Cave, the limited involvement of participants in ritual activities is even more apparent, as the lack of an external terrace would have hindered the gathering of people around its entrance. Furthermore, the exclusivity of ritual activities was reinforced by the fact that access could be gained only by sea. Another unique trait of sacred caves relates to the secluded setting in which ritual activities were performed. Extrapolating from the tests carried out in Skotino Cave on Crete, we can infer that carbon dioxide values inside the Daskalio Cave increased in relation to the distance and depth. We can assume that they generally remained below toxic levels, which nevertheless could be increased with the use of hearths, torches, or lamps, and the number of participants in relation to the available space. Natural light, depending on the time of the day and the season of the year, would illuminate different parts of the cave, occasionally in the form of a radiant light, which constituted a visually powerful phenomenon. The penetrating light could also generate shadows, thus contributing further to the illusory perceptions of cavernous space. Sound, when tested with the aid of a professional singer inside Skotino Cave, was parallel to the clarity and tone achieved in a fine concert hall and could easily be diffused to the lower levels. Excuse me. Furthermore, as has been proposed for sacred caves on Crete, it is possible that inside Daskalio Cave, an altered state of consciousness could also be achieved in areas of total darkness, enhanced by the repetitive use of a rattle or a drum, which would have echoed in the cave. Additionally, consumed alcohol could also have contributed to an altered state of consciousness in Minoan caves, as indicated by the variety of storage jars, pouring and drinking vessels. Although similar tests have not been conducted in the Daskalio Cave, we can appreciate how the awe-inspiring speleothems, the unique light and darkness prevailing inside the downward sloping chambers, the echoing sound, the smell of burning aromatic substances, the lit fires that produced shadows, and the toxicity of smoke would have generated unique and memorable experiences for the participants. Regarding the nature of the material remains, which attest to cave-bound ritual activities, Late Minoan cult practices are recognized by the presence of material cultural remains, such as utilitarian vessels, which related to the storage of essentials, the heating and consumption of food, or the pouring and drinking of liquids. Other objects are less ordinary, employed for the burning of aromatic substances, such as writer for libations and bronze figurines for worship practices. The finds recovered from the late Minoan deposits of Daskalio Cave are all consistent with practices performed in Minoan sacred caves. As I draw this presentation to a close, I would like to summarize and emphasize how the element of sacredness of Daskalio Cave connected to seafaring connectivity and maritime travel. The coastal location of the Daskalio Cave, therefore, and the presence of imports may suggest a close connection with travel, and it is possible that the cave marked a point of reference or a site of pilgrimage for seafarers or merchants. Those with access to the cave are likely to have belonged to local or regional communities, as indicated by the use of local pottery, who nevertheless incorporated Minoan material culture and practices. Judging from the type and the quality of the finds, one could argue that the number of people who engaged in these activities were limited in number, were most likely privileged in having access to prestigious objects, and they were cosmopolitan and eclectic in their habits, possibly a result of their engagement in seafaring activities. The rituals may have been performed by seafarers who expressed their gratitude to deities for reaching their coastal stopover safely along their maritime journey. Daskalio is not the only example of a coastal sacred cave on an island. Inatos Cave on Crete is located on the south coast of the island with clear visibility towards the Libyan Sea and the southern maritime routes towards the islands of the Southeast Aegean, Cyprus, and the Levant. Sacred caves also constituted significant landmarks to wandering and traveling people. Karadima makes an interesting case about the sacred Drakena Cave on Kefalonia in the Ionian Sea, as well as Olympia and Elian Pylos on the Peloponnese. I'm sorry, which from the, we're talking about Drakena Cave on Kefalonia, which from the Archaic to the Hellenistic era received offerings such as cups by travelers or merchants to express their gratitude to deities for the safe trip. Furthermore, the Drakena Cave, as well as Olympia and Elian Pylos on the Peloponnese, shared similar ceramic assemblages. This distribution pattern has been interpreted as the result of maritime travelers visiting these sites, which are likely to have belonged to the same cult. It could be argued, therefore, that the prominent position of sacred caves may act as a goal and invitation for the pilgrim. But what is it that makes Daskalio Cave special with respect to its coastal location? The cultural eclecticism evident by the presence of imported, emulated, local, and regional finds suggests that the cave represents a locus of enmeshed ritual practices generated through maritime networks and mobility. Is the coastal location of the Daskalio Cave any different from similar caves on continental littoral locations? I would argue that there is in fact a qualitative difference which relates to its special position on the fringes of an island. Its insular location brings to the forefront the question of islandness, natural versus cultural boundaries, and the significance of island bounds as a buffer zone where practices and identities are underpinned by maritime activities, in particular historical contexts. The association of the Daskalio Cave with Minoan cave-bound cult practices suggests the connection of the site to seafaring activities at a time when communities of the Southeast Aegean adopted Minoan cultural norms through their active engagement in seafaring networks. Whether the worshippers were local or Cretan seafarers traveling along the east string of islands which connected Crete to the Anatolian coast, it is apparent that religious activities intersected with maritime traveling. The involvement of islands of the Southeast Aegean in the networks of the Eastern Mediterranean is further demonstrated by the fact that the local decorated pottery of Kos can be found along maritime routes from the island of Aegean to the coastal centers of Anatolian Cyprus. Daskalio Cave, however, presents an interesting case, as the cultic activities were at the same time entangled with local traditions, as attested by the presence of local pottery wares and shapes, which were adapted to the needs of Minoan-type ritual practices. The incorporation of local material culture may be understood in relation to regional availability, or it can be interpreted as an intentional choice that blurs the lines between the island and its oceanic periphery. The liminality of the Daskalio Cave also relates to its position between land and water on the fringes of the settled valley with restricted access by sea. To conclude, I would argue that island cult loci in the prehistoric Aegean could be understood as sacred sea marks, where maritime identities were forged through engagement in seafaring and shared ritual practices. The medieval tradition and practices known from visiting literary texts, as suggested by Mirtova seem to echo those of prehistoric cultures in the way they blend with several aspects of the Minoan uses of caves, as explained earlier. As argued by Veiku and myself, the main features of cavernous spaces around the Aegean Sea, which appear to have shaped some similarities in their diachronic use by humans, seem to have been A, the locations along central networks of human mobility, B, the sensorial understanding of their enclosed spaces as liminal, and C, their articulation of symbolic meaning as loci memoria for local communities. Daskalio and Kalymnos is one among many examples of caves with recurrent or diachronic occupation in the Aegean region. It was located at the nodal point of a broad communication network comprising the Aegean islands and the opposite mainland coasts, which was active from the prehistoric until the medieval periods. Mobility then, within the context of the archaeology of travel and cult practices in the ancient Mediterranean, should be understood in both spatial and temporal terms. I would like to conclude by drawing inferences with modern-day cave rituals in Greece, as attested by an example from the island of Karpathos in the southeast Aegean. It's, of course, I'm not suggesting that we're talking about the continuous use of the same caves throughout the history of the Aegean, but it is interesting how caves, even until today, continue to be used as sacred spaces. This is, you can see Karpathos on the left, and at the side, I'll be talking about the cave, which is situated on Vrikous, known as Vrikous, and there's a cave there on the northwestern coast of Karpathos. You can see the cave is actually situated right at the end of the tip on the photograph on the left. You can see how they have formed and shaped the entrance to the cave, the sacred cave, and it is known as the cave of St. John the Baptist. And you can see inside the cave how they've turned the cave into a Christian chapel. And the next slide, you can see people, pilgrims, let's say, you can see them walking along the cliff to reach the cave of St. John the Baptist. Again, the participants cooking for most part of the day when they're visiting the site for the religious festivities. And of course, such religious festivals cannot take place without singing and playing music and dancing, of course. So this brings me now to the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention and your patience. And I'll close here with a list of select bibliography. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Mina. Before we pass to the questions and answers, of which I hope there will be a few, I just want to say that the chat feature is still on, and it looks like a single speech bubble, and you can type your text into it, and that can be read by the other participants as well as the lecturer and the host. If you'd like to ask a question, you can type your questions into the double speech bubble, where there's one on top of the other, and only you, the speaker, and the host can see these, and I will read out the questions. There is a question actually that has come up, which kind of slightly coincides with what I wanted to know as well. The question is, does the limited examples of votive offerings indicate limited visitors or lack of votive tradition in the culture?
I would be cautious to answer this question, but I would probably think I think my inclination would be to interpret this phenomenon as limited visits to the site. I think I believe that the actual practice of transporting votive offerings seems to be part of the practices taking place at the Daskalio Cave, but the limited number, I think, could perhaps relate to the fact that it was not a very accessible cave due to its location. But of course, we can never be certain. So this is only a tentative answer.
Okay, another question is, well, first of all, thank you for an interesting talk. I find your suggested ritualistic connections along the known maritime trade routes convincing. And then Nick Service goes on to ask, what more work do you think should be done next?
Regarding the Daskalio Cave or caves in general? There's not much we can do about Daskalio, but I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done and should be done. And this is something we've been discussing with my colleague, Mirtoveikou, who's a specialist in Byzantine archaeology. And I think would be, there's a lot of potential to study other cave sites, inland cave sites as well, to see how they're used diachronically in the insular Aegean, but not necessarily only on the islands. And so I think there is a lot of potential. It would be interesting to look at the ritual use of caves diachronically and how they last in people's minds and memories as sacred locations, sacred landmarks.
The next question is, can you describe the ritual practices and to which deities were they dedicated? This maybe is for a later period.
Yes, I presented only the Minoan evidence tonight. I think if I wanted to describe the ritual practices, I would have to extrapolate from knowledge we already have for Minoan sacred caves, and I think I presented the possible rituals that were taking place, such as the cooking of food, drinking perhaps wine or other substances, burning aromatic substances, consuming food, using cult ritualistic objects such as the figurine that was found inside the cave. Perhaps singing or chanting would be most probably form part of the ritual, although we have no concrete evidence for that, for Daskalio. As for the deities, I can't possibly tell. I mean, I could have used the word deities or spirits or ancestors. I cannot limit myself. I cannot give you one particular name, but perhaps if we accept this connection to Minoan ritual activities, perhaps something we could imagine, perhaps sort of similar beliefs in ancestral figures or spirits that the Minoans believed in.
There's a question from Nicoletta Momigliano, and she says, thank you for your excellent talk. And she'd like to know, is the water present in the Daskalio Cave all year round?
I think it is, if I remember correctly from reading the description by Mayuri, I think, and what Benzi writes, I think the water is present throughout the year, if I'm not mistaken. Yes.
And then from Michael Donnelly, he says, what a great lecture. And he wants to know when the publication mentioned at the start is expected.
That's a good question. Hopefully in maybe this year or maybe next year. We're not certain yet. It was the article that Mirtoveikou and myself co-authored was presented at a cave workshop, and we're waiting for the proceedings to be published. So hopefully it will not be too long.
Okay, and probably a final question. Somebody wants to know if there are any related Minoan or pre-Minoan finds from ritual caves of the Deros or other caves in the southern Peloponnese.
Southern Peloponnese, I wouldn't know. I have to check that. I can't answer that from the top of my head. I'm sorry. I picked that particular cave, Drakina cave in Kefalonia, specifically because I wanted to illustrate the connection through maritime traveling and the connection through the same belief in the same ritual cult. But I would have to look at the other caves in the Peloponnese. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay, and the final question is from Matusz Kula. He wants to know if there are any resemblances of the features of sacred caves in the reflected in Bronze Age architecture, perhaps mimicking natural caves.
I've looked and I've looked for a feature in Minoan. I haven't been able to find anything, I'm afraid. If anyone knows, please send me an email or please type something in the chat. I'm afraid I haven't been able to find anything.
Okay, and I'm just squeezing in a last question because it's just come in. And that is, well, first of all, thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I was wondering if there were any pigments found on the walls of the caves, or possible something that could be construed as wall paintings.
Not that I'm aware of. I haven't found anything in the original publications mentioned by Mayuri, and I haven't found any in the subsequent publications by Benzi either. No, so the answer is no.
No. Okay, well, on that note, and knowing that your publication will be out hopefully fairly soon, I just want to say thank you so much on behalf of everybody who's listened in, and behalf of obviously the Friends of the British School at Athens and the British School at Athens, to you, Dr. Mina, for really a fascinating lecture. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you to you, Anna Marie, for inviting me. Sorry, I apologize, Maria Christine, and to the director of the school and Vangelia Kiriazzi for presenting me, and to all the audience that participated.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Maria. We'll say goodbye. Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Bye-bye.